You're listening to an Anazao Ministries podcast.
Who is Morbius? Well, that's only a question we've been asking for what feels like 5 years at this point, because boy, has this movie been postponed over and over and over again. I waited a long time for New Mutants, but I think we've waited even longer for Morbius. And yet there are still people saying, why do we need this? Well, we're going to talk about all of that here today on this episode of Systematic Geekology as we prepare you for the upcoming Morbius film. I'm Brandon Knight. I'm joined here today by Joe, and we're going to be talking about another great 90s character. Well, pre-90s, actually way before the 90s, but I think both of ours more introduction to this character comes from the 90s Spider-Man show. But before we get into this episode, I just want to remind you, good listener, have you heard about Patreon? It's kind of like PBS, where you give us money. Oh man, you should have seen that reaction from Joe. You give us money and we give you stuff. And you help support the show and you keep the lights on and you give us motivation to be creative with your money. Give us some money. That's a John Mulaney reference. So yeah, head on over to patreon.com/systematicgeekology. Subscribe to one of our tiers and unlock some great bonus stuff like D&D playthroughs and other stuff. Again, I'm Brandon Knight. I'm a seminary student. And recently, I have been geeking out. Well, you know, we're getting ready for the baby. So actually, I don't know when this episode's going to come out pretty soon. So yeah, we've been getting ready for the baby and went over to my in-laws house yesterday, my brother and sister-in-law house, and just dug through baby clothes. Honestly, that's really what I've been geeking out on the most lately is just getting all of the stuff we need for baby. We got a great book at our baby shower, The ABCs of Church History. So it's like A is for apple, an apricot, and Augustine. And then when he gets older, there's also like a little like more in-depth, but still for children, paragraph on who is Augustine. And then you get to see, and it's like cat, cow, Calvin. It's great. Go get that book. So yeah, that's what I've been geeking out on, mostly baby stuff.
What's up, everybody? I am Joe. I am a marketer, a podcaster, a broadcaster. And recently, my wife and I have started watching through Witcher. I was a little late to the party as far as this goes. I have opinions. That could be an episode in and of itself. I certainly have not been going through the baby's version of ABC of church history. But I have been going back through and kind of getting a recap on Morbius and watching through the animated series. Did you like that smooth transition? That was good.
Yeah.
So I think what you said is probably as emblematic as you can get as far as this character goes. So just to give the specifics of what you were going for at the beginning, Morbius was created by Roy Thomas and Gil Kane in 1971. He made his first appearance in the comics in the Amazing Spider-Man issue 101. So he's a character that's 50 plus years old. Yeah, 51 years old.
Yeah.
But most of us know him as a 90s character because of Spider-Man, the animated series, because there were a few key characters that are by all rights B characters that kind of played as Spider-Man's reoccurring ensemble cast of characters within his universe. And one of them was Morbius. And so there's such a resonance of this character, and I think, and I would be willing to bet that that's exactly what this movie is capitalizing off of, and why this movie is coming out now is the people that have the money to take their kids and all of that kind of stuff are 90s kids, and so capitalizing on parents and then children. But before we get into the character profile, to camp on the movie related portion of it, I don't know how attuned you are with the latest in movie news, but as of this recording, there has been talks that every single reference to Spider-Man and the larger extended universe has been cut from the movie, and the only thing is an end credit scene.
Really? After all this time? 7 years of watching trailers, of watching Matt Smith walk down the same hallway, and all these little Easter eggs that I definitely saw a trailer for right before I saw No Way Home. They've cut everything.
Well, therein lies the thing, right?
Is they were trying to capitalize.
Well, they saw the success. They saw the capability. And so now it would stand to reason that Sony is trying to say, okay, we saw how well this could do. We own the IP. Let's go build out a universe, and then start by putting these characters into their own pocket universes. So that way we can eventually build out like a Multiverse of Madness, No Way Home sort of thing, because it's being said that the Madam Web has been cast, and she's going to act as the Doctor Strange of this universe, kind of weaving everything together. And one thing that interests me, for all of you Spider-Verse War of the Spider fans out there from the comics, in a recent interview, one of the writers was asked about the connection and all of that kind of stuff, and who is the Spider-Man of this universe, because there's a lot of talk of Andrew Garfield being the Spider-Man of Mobius's universe, and so on and so forth. There's a lot of talk.
There's a Venom reference also in the movie, so that's also on the table.
Right. And so he said that every single universe, or every single world in our universe, has a spider totem. So it stands that there will be a Spider-Man or a Spider-Woman in every one of the universes, with the idea being, for those of you that are uninitiated, the whole arc of Spider-Verse and all of that is built around the spider totem, and the spider totem choosing people, and so on and so forth, which kind of completely and totally revamps the whole idea of Peter Parker being bit by a radioactive spider and all of those kinds of things. But I digress. Which in theory is cool, but here's my problem, and then we'll hop over to who is Morbius. But we figure we'll get the film related stuff out of the way first.
Yeah.
In theory, so much of what's being said makes a whole lot of sense and could be really cool. Here's the problem. A, Jared Leto, he's always a problem. And B, nobody cares enough about these characters to have a standalone movie about them, especially if Sony is the one that's making it. You know what I mean? Like, they don't write well enough to be able to save with dialogue, and you know, it breaks my 90s kid heart, but the truth of the matter is there is no Venom without Spider-Man. There is no Carnage without Venom and Spider-Man. There is no Morbius without Spider-Man, and depending on which 90s kid you ask, Blade.
Oh yeah, that's true too. I want to say this delicately, because normally I don't. But man, Sony really has Marvel. Sony really has Mickey by the ears here, because they really do.
Yeah.
They are going to keep Spider-Man in all of its intellectual property-ness. Disney has to buy Sony. And I'm sorry, at that point, it has to be a monopoly.
Oh yeah, there has to come a point. there has to come a point where too much is too much, and one company cannot control all of the various IPs. But when you're talking about Spider-Man, you're talking about the rarefied air of children's IP stuff. So it's not about the movies. It's not about the TV shows. It's about that merchandise. It's about slapping that spider, slapping those webs on everything under the sun and making billions. And yes, I'm saying billions with a B off of one particular IP. We're talking about the Big Blue Boy Scout. We're talking about Batman. We're talking about Spider-Man.
That is what you can make your money on. And Sony knows that. And Sony knows is that they got the ball in their court. As for this movie in general now, this does scratch an itch for me because I get it. They're not Marvel movies. They're not MCU films. Well, kind of the end credit scene of Venom 2 is, I guess. But these aren't MCU quality films. These type of movies scratch a nostalgia itch for me for a time when superhero films were simpler. My wife and I, we've started rewatching the MCU films. We've done Iron Man, Incredible Hulk. Yes, that's an MCU film. And Iron Man 2. And they're different because they're Paramount and Universal films. And it really gets at that old school superhero flick vibe. And that's really that's all I'm expecting from this movie. I'm not expecting to be blown away. Again, it's Jared Leto. You have some personal gripes with him, but he's also like an okay actor. Like, he's not the best actor in the world. And I'll be the first one to admit that Matt Smith isn't my favorite Doctor. So even that part's not really bringing me to the yard either. But what I am hoping for is that this movie just gets me with that old school superhero movie vibe before every single movie had to be breaking the box office record. When there was just, here's the summer flick, go and enjoy it.
As some of the very best in movie making, the movies that you can point to that most people, even if you don't realize, you've come across some version of it being used in other IP, these legends of cinema that are not that would never be made today because they're not billion-dollar movies. They're not making all of this money and all of that kind of stuff. And the problem becomes when you are so reliant on everything being the start of a franchise, the start of a universe, all of this kind of stuff, that you miss the opportunity to just tell a story. Just tell a story. That's all you need to do. And that's it. If you look at what, Batman 89 is, not connected, but still lauded as one of the greats, all of that kind of stuff. Superman the movie, yes, it's got its quirks. Yes, we make fun of it, but I'm pointing out this era of movie in particular because these movies were not billion-dollar movies. They didn't have millions upon millions upon millions of dollars put behind them and all of this kind of stuff. That wasn't what they were. But they are wonderful in their simplistic nature. They're just a superhero popcorn flick. And so for me, that takes a bit of a different turn because we have gotten far enough in storytelling within the superhero genre that it opens the door for all of these different subgenres within superhero flicks. The only one that I would necessarily say that we've actually gotten to is like political thriller with Captain America. And so I think we have a prime opportunity, especially if you're telling the story of Michael Morbius. If you're not telling the story of Morbius and Spider-Man, if you're just going with an origin story for him, then you have to obviously fill that with content that matters, that people give that people care enough to go and see. And that, to me, would suggest that you have the opportunity to tell a different kind of story. As far as Morbius goes, I think you've got one shot to do it without Spider-Man. I don't think you get a second shot to do it without Spider-Man. Not with Morbius.
Okay.
With Venom, there's a whole era of Venom separate of Spider-Man. But getting there requires all of his time with Spider-Man. Caring about that part of Venom's storyline requires having gone through the time with, and that was the big fatal flaw for Venom. So if you're going to introduce the character like this, which I'm not even sure they should have, but then again, I'm tainted from Spider-Man the Animated Series. This is all you've got. You need a Spider-Man for Morbius too. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So before we get into the actual like nuts and bolts of who is Morbius, I'm just curious. How interested are you in this film, honestly?
Say that one more time.
Before we get into the actual nuts and bolts of like who the character is, how interested are you in this movie in general? Because
I think this is going to be hot garbage. I think this is going to be a steaming pile of dung. I think that this is going to be a crap show from go. I really don't think that this is going to be good. I'm sorry, guys. I know we're supposed to hype you guys. We're supposed to be a whole thing. I understand that, but I don't think there's enough meat on the bones. First off, second off, you've got Sony at the helm. They can't create a movie out of a paper bag, and that you've got an IP that has even less meat on the bone than Venom did, and we all saw how good Venom was. I say tongue in cheek. So I mean, again, I beg of you, Sony, prove me wrong. Get me to care and all of that. And I promise, somebody like me, a 90s kid like me, and I'm not even necessarily a Marvel guy, I could tell you way more about DC stuff and all of that. You'd have me hooked like a mark, I promise you, if you just made me care. I don't think they have the tools to be able to make me care.
And that's, again, this is supposed to be a hype episode, and here's Joe being the angry old man shaking his fist at the clouds. But to be fair, there's not a lot of good hype for this film. We're just going to be honest about it. I listened to the podcast iFanboy, and they have zero interest in this movie. Now, they are a different demographic because they're in their like mid to late 40s. So they're kind of outside of this 90s cartoon era that they're trying to bank off of. But they raised a really good point. They've raised a really good point talking about how there's a difference between using a B character in Marvel, the MCU, doing Guardians of the Galaxy. There's a difference between somebody who has spent the time, done the work, put together a great cast, got a good director, and took a shot and hit it. They did it with Guardians of the Galaxy. They did it with Ant-Man. These movies that, like, by this point, MCU had their formula, had the money. They could take those shots. Morbius is a B generously character. Like, he's almost a C-level character. There's not a lot of Morbius out there, And
to give you guys an idea, we needed you're getting half of this episode as a conversation about the movie, because you'd only be getting about a 20-minute long episode if we just talked about Morbius, because there's just simply not that much meat on the bone. If you have seen Spider-Man the Animated Series, you have seen the most significant story beats of Morbius. That's just being honest, and we will get there. We'll talk about all of that. But I'll even go as far as to say, okay, so Iron Man, right? Some MCU fan is crying foul right now because of Iron Man and the fact that Iron Man was a B level character. Let me put it this way: if Iron Man was considered a B level character before Robert Downey Jr., then we're talking about a C or D level character. Just being real.
Absolutely.
You know what I
Absolutely.
mean? Especially when you're talking about the actual comics, the source material of all of this.
Sure.
There's next to goose egg as far as meaningful storylines for this character. Even all of the stuff with him and Blade was all mostly manufactured for the show. They took some crossover stuff and went to the extent that they could with it. So absolutely, that like I'm all for. Allow for Guardians of the Galaxy is nothing like the comics are nothing like the TV show. That's part of why they tried to they tried to revamp the Guardians in comic form after the movie came out. Nobody cared because that wasn't what they were popular from. Just like with Morbius, the comics aren't what he's popular from. That's part of why I say, take it dark, do it. Like, don't be afraid to do it. Do some Universal monster stuff with this thing. Like, you have a blank slate like none other to be able to, even with all of these other examples that we're drawing from, they had some nuance to go off of. With Guardians, they basically had a blank slate, so they made them space pirates that listen to 80s music. You have a blank slate here? Make it your Universal monster movie and make him the Dracula of your universe, and you'll have a whole group of people, even outside of that 30 plus, millennials with parents demo. You'll have that 40, 50 plus who grew up on cheesy horror movies.
Sure. And that is my hook for why I'm going to give the pitch to support this film, because even though it's horror light, it's not even like good actual horror films. Marvel and DC has such a rich inventory of horror characters that I just want somebody to make a movie of. Like, please, can I please have a live action Constantine film that's not Keanu Reeves? Please, somebody give me that movie already. Swamp Thing, like, these are DC characters, but over on the Marvel side, like Morbius, like Blade, like Dracula, because that was a thing for a while. Even characters like Ghost Rider and Moon Knight, like, I'm willing to support these just so that way Sony, Disney, Warner Brothers doesn't care, but the other two maybe they might care. That I want more horror. I want more scary stuff because there's all these great characters. Netflix sometime this year is finally, Neil Gaiman has given the green light for the Sandman series, and I could not be more excited for that.
Oh, get out of town.
Let's get into what?
Oh, for real? Like, D got the green light to adapt Neil Gaiman's Sandman?
There's a Sandman series coming to Netflix this year. Okay.
You can believe that covering Neil Gaiman Sandman is going to end up on our list of topics now that's coming out. Like, that is
guaranteed. Anyway. That is coming out this year. Yeah. Anyway, let's get into Michael Morbius. So, who is this fella? We've alluded to it a little bit because Joe just said he could be the Dracula of the Sony monster Spider-Man universe. We really need to work on a name for this. Morbius, the living vampire. Who is Michael Morbius, Joe?
So Michael Morbius was a fun facts, a Greek child, which if you didn't, if your only experience with Morbius is from the TV show, they tried to give him such a Transylvanian, I will suck your blood sort of accent. Like, they totally missed Greek and just went for like Dracula.
Perfect.
Right. So he was a kid born in Greece, and the Reader's Digest version is when he's in college, he becomes a biochemist, and he and his partner Emil, who that was taken to that was changed over to, was it Felicia Harding? Was the love interest of his in
that sounds
TV
correct?
Show?
Yes.
Yeah. So
it's been a while, but yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah, so he still had that partner in the TV show, that kind of dynamic. And the idea is that they are trying to help people get cured of fatal blood diseases because Michael Morbius has a rare, deadly blood condition that makes him essentially weak, like his body extremely weak. Which is actually how he meets his friend Emil when they're kids, and they grow up together. But anyway, I've already told you more than mostly any other medium is probably going to tell you, short of the comics, because this is stuff drawn from the comics. So in the midst of doing experiments on bats, on trying to heal blood diseases, Michael wins a Nobel Prize. But it's kind of a heartbreaking story beat that he's not able to attend the ceremony because of his condition, because he was too weak to even, there's a scene with him in a cup of tea and he can't even hold the cup of tea because his body is so weak. And so part of the procedure is, because this is 70s, guys, we're talking about 70s Marvel. So we have to hit you over the head with the fish. We need to get as on the nose as you possibly can get. He's doing experiments with vampire bats, and
not just
basically, yeah, not just bats, vampire bats, and basically doing electroshock therapy on the bats. And it is it's through the procedure that it cures him, but as I'm sure you all have gotten to, it has, as comics like to call, unforeseen consequences, and turns him into, as Brandon referred to, Michael Morbius, the living vampire. And so he basically turns into the appearance, like his appearance basically turns into the stereotypical vampire, white skin, teeth grows into fangs, and all of that kind of stuff. It was real funny in the TV show. For those of you that haven't seen it, because at the time they couldn't get the sign off on a lot of different things of acts of violence, they couldn't have a vampire going around biting people's necks. So he had these little suction things in the middle of his hands, and they couldn't say blood, so they would say plasma. So he was always looking for plasma, and he would grab onto people with his hands, and like some weird like electricity, something's happening sort of thing would envelop the person, and that would be how he would feed. So
that's great.
That's basically his big thing, and it's good guy turned bad, kills his friend, Emil, in his bloodlust and all of that. And that would be where I guess that they're going to take a lot of the inspiration from Jared Leto's rendition, where it's going to be the biochemist that is trying to cure the blood disease. Things go wrong. He suddenly has bloodlust. He suddenly becomes a vampire. All of those kinds of things. I would highly, highly doubt that in 2022 they're going to show electroshock therapy with a bat. So my guess is they'll do some kind of blood transfusion nonsense, something like that.
From the looks of it, too, it looks like he transforms into the vampire. Like, obviously he transforms into a vampire, but in other adaptions, like the cartoon, he is a vampire. Like, he becomes a vampire. Where in this, it looks like it's an ability that he's trying to learn how to control, which is superheroes movie storytelling 101 because he initially, like, there is a scene where he looks, and it's actually pretty good, I would say, for the CGI, where he looks like the living vampire. He looks like how he does in the comics, but for the most part, like you're talking about how he gets the white skin and becomes a vampire. Yeah, there's a scene with him shirtless and abs, and I have never seen Dracula with abs. So I'm just going to say it right now that we're going to capitalize on the appearance of Jared Leto a little bit in this movie. Yeah, so that's Michael Morbius, everybody. I do want to maybe lean into our horror background a little bit, Joe, and talk about what is the difference between a vampire and a living vampire? Because obviously that word living is there for a reason. I hope.
So vampires most of the time are the undead. They're referred to as they've been killed and brought back is the idea. It's the same idea between vampires and zombies, where Morbius was never killed. Morbius is still technically alive. He just was infected and became a vampire that way.
Which is part of the reason why you look at Last Man on Earth, I Am Legend, all of those various versions of that story. The zombies kind of have a bit of a vampire-esque to them, because to some degree they do follow this same pattern of dead brought back to life. Whereas with Morbius, he wasn't killed. He was not killed off. He did not have all of his plasma sucked out. He was a human who, much like Dr. Frankenstein, was messing in the realm of God. Those darn scientists messing in the realm of God. That's all a joke. I should not have made that joke. Listen to your doctor. But that's a common horror trope as well, of like scientists messing in the realm of things that they shouldn't be. And it goes sour on them and they develop superpowers or bring a monster to life or some other third thing, create a virus that kills everybody. I don't know. So that's Michael Morbius for you. He fights Spider-Man. He fights Blade. That's it.
So
honestly, folks.
Well, so the biggest thing that Michael Morbius is known for, and this is where I bring this one up because I would have loved to have seen this used as the major introduction point for him. And this is what we saw as the major introduction point for him in the animated show. But the thing that Michael Morbius is known best for is his introduction into Spider-Man's world when Spider-Man was going through his mutation into the Man-Spider, where he had multiple limbs and was basically turning into a giant mutated spider. There's a story arc where he is trying to cure himself and he comes across Morbius. They of course get into a fight over time, actually stretching across most of the mutated version or mutated, actually his fights would oftentimes go across the different mutated characters of the Marvel universe. Okay. People like Blade, The Thing. He had run-ins with the Lizard, those kinds of characters. But and that would kind of be the reason why he would get lumped in with a lot of those characters on team-up books in the times where he was used and things like that. But as far as his time with Spider-Man, his most notable thing is he helped Spider-Man create the cure for his mutation and all of that. And at one point tried to take some that cures him temporarily of his vampirism. And so that to me would be how I would introduce Jared Leto into the universe. But outside of that, I mean, yeah, he's got things like, he's run as a one of the Midnight Suns. He does have the Midnight Massacre, but where he's teamed up with Blade. but outside of that, that's about probably the most notable that you're going to get from this particular character. And it's not bad. It's not
Sure.
like a bad storyline. And I would absolutely say to watch it, if nothing else, even if you're not going to go out and find, comics from the 70s, then I would say, it's an opportunity to watch some really fun storytelling and things like that. But outside of that, I'm not sure that there's much more meat to be had outside of just taking the ball and running with it in a different kind of direction. And I think that that's going to be Sony's key to success as far as this goes, is being willing to do that in a compelling way.
All right. It's the compelling part that they need to work on, but
yep.
Yeah, that's what they got to do here. So that is Michael Morbius for you. Hopefully in all of this, you are maybe at least more educated on who this character is, and maybe that will be enough to persuade you to go give this a try.
And I'm going to echo what Brandon said here. We're not necessarily hyped, but going and supporting these kinds of movies, doing something to support these kinds of movies helps allow for more movies to be made that are outside of the box, that aren't just the MCU over and over and over again, that allow for deeper storytelling.
It can, or if anything, it gets us a different genre to watch instead of Disney superheroes. Recently, TJ and I did an episode, if you missed it, go listen to it, on the video game Dying Light, talking about zombies, and it was a lot of fun. I wanted to bring this up a little bit again, talking about this concept of living vampires, and we talked about zombies in the other episode, and this idea of being brought back to life, and maybe some of the religious symbolism that we could possibly see in zombies. Specifically, this idea of being brought back to life. It kind of falls apart after that point. But when it comes to vampires and living vampires, is there any religious symbolism that we can maybe pull from this?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, this is exactly where something like this thrives, because you have even in the earliest depictions of vampires, there tends to be a baked in religious connection and symbolism to it all. But yeah, I mean, you have somebody that either you could go the route of being consumed by the dark, or somebody, dying and coming back to life and taking that approach to it. I think either way, it is very easy to draw some kind of symbolism off of a character like this.
Yes. Yeah. And I don't want to cram too much into this at this point, because we haven't seen the movie. And a lot of times what we do here is we talk about the thing and then we reflect on it. Well, we haven't seen the movie, and to be quite honest, we're not super familiar with the character either. So it's not like we can say, hey, let's talk about this one very specific issue and look at the religious symbolism here. So to some degree, just when it comes to vampires in general, yeah, we get this idea of being brought back to life. We get this idea of, you look at maybe a character like Michael Morbius, who has this bloodlust, even though he doesn't really want to. This is a byproduct of his disease, of this experiment rather that he did. And he has this bloodlust. He desires something that he doesn't actually want. And I think there's a little bit of a biblical illusion that we can pull from there. I think of Romans 7, where Paul talks about how he desires to do the things that he doesn't want to do, and the things that he should do, he doesn't want to do. Just like this internal warfare that we as Christians have for wanting to walk in the Spirit, follow the path of Jesus, but also this craving to go back to our old lifestyle in sin. So maybe if anything, that is the illusion that you can pick from here.
And I'll be honest, there is a part of me that I hope that they can allow for that redemption story to be told of him just looking to redeem himself and all of that kind of stuff, because I think that's one of Morbius's more compelling traits, but B, I'm always a sucker for somebody who's looking for a second chance,
Sure. Yeah. And I think you could easily do that, make him more of this, maybe not vigilante anti-hero, but like a guy who's trying to do good, even though his impulses aren't that direction. Could be a good story. Right. Sony, you're going to let us down, but just let us down easy. Break up with us easy, man. Hey, let's wrap this show up. All right, Joe, before we get out of here, what is something you would like to recommend to our audience today?
I would recommend the TV show The Witcher. I think it's very interesting. I do think that you need to be, viewer discretion is advised for those of you with little ones around. But outside of that, yeah, it's definitely an interesting show. That's for sure.
All right. I still need to watch that. As for me, I would like to recommend at this point something way more lighthearted. I just started watching the Netflix He-Man and the Masters of the Universe Revelation. So there's 2 Netflix He-Man shows. One is clearly for children. The other one is the one I'm watching. And it is supposed to be a spiritual descendant of the original show. The whole He-Man thing, before my time, but has always been something that I have been interested in getting into. The whole sword and sorcery genre is something that as an adult I've been trying to get more time with. Conan the Barbarian, He-Man, and the like. So far it's been pretty good. It's not very long either. I think there's only 10 episodes, and Mark Hamill does the voice of Skeletor. So there's 3 great reasons for you to check it out.
There you go.
Joe, where can people find you if they want to check out your other programming?
So you can find me either on Facebook or any of the places where you find podcasts at either Buddy Walk with Jesus or Kingdom on the Road. I am live on Facebook 6 out of the 7 days a week, so you'll be able to find me.
Cool. And you can find my show, My Seminary Life, where I talk about the things I'm studying in seminary right now, wherever you get your podcasts, and on Facebook and Instagram at My Seminary Life Pod. Thanks for listening to this episode. We truly hope it has encouraged you to go check this movie out. Maybe it's given you some realistic view on Sony a little bit as well, but hopefully this has given you a reason to go check this movie out, support it, try to get some more dark superhero movies out there. Go to our website, systematicecology.org, to let us know what other movies you would like us to talk about. Hey, do you like Blade? Do you like Ghost Rider? Please tell me you like Ghost Rider, because I want to talk about it sometime. And we would be happy to do those episodes for you. And remember, we're all a chosen people, a geekdom of priests.
This was an Anazao Ministries podcast. If you enjoyed this show and would like to learn more about our network, be sure to check out the Anazao Ministries Podcast Network.